Today we're here with Winter Olympic medalist, former barrister and now the Member of Parliament for Warringah, focused on climate action and integrity in politics. Zali Steggall, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
If you could change one piece of policy today, what would that be?
Geez, that's just tough. If I could have
You
a
can give me a
magic
few. You
wand,
can give me
there's
a few.
so many I would
What would you
change.
do?
None of this is simple.
Australians do like a beer.
I know they do, but we are paying more tax that way than massive multinational gas companies.
Being a lawyer, you would have seen people in the most vulnerable positions. Did that change the way you looked at politics, or has that influenced your empathy for people through politics?
Law matters. If the law is well drafted, it will be easy to apply. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Now, if you don't mind, I've got a few videos of the rock jump.
Oh, okay.
From the creature.
Consequences of a moment of fun can be a lifetime of consequence.
Aren't Australians the biggest gamblers in the world?
Horrendous. Costs us a fortune. It exacerbates health, mental health, family breakdowns, domestic violence. Like, it is horrendous.
Because they heckle each other too when you're talking. Like,
oh yeah, there's a lot of heckling that goes on. Behaviour that I wish would change. I'm excited about Australia because I think Australia is just a phenomenal nation.
now I feel like we've seen more support for independence within Australia generally. Why do you think that is?
The independents haven't emerged out of nothing. They've emerged because there's a need for it. We don't have laws that prevent lies and political advertising.
So you can just say what you want?
Pretty much, which is crazy.
Today we're here with Winter Olympic medalist, former barrister and now the Member of Parliament for Warringah, focused on climate action and integrity in politics. Zali Steggall, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Now, Zoe, being an Olympic athlete, how does that compare to politics?
Well, I think it was actually the perfect training ground. Like, politics is fairly adversarial, high pressure, very much in the public eye. So there are a lot of similarities. And obviously my Olympic career started when I was 17, went to my first Olympics when I was pretty young, finishing my HSC. And you're in the public eye, scrutinised, criticised a lot. And so in many ways that prepared me well for politics. You're also really, you're used to the high pressure situation. You know, election day, there's only one winner. There's no second prize. I think my training as an Olympian, also, you know, being fairly determined, hardworking, training for a long time for a goal that you're trying to achieve, there's a lot of similarity in that way with politics.
You were the first Winter Olympic athlete to win an individual medal for Australia. Like, did you know how big that was going to be?
Look, it was, I guess it was a long time in the making for me. It was my third Olympic Games and I was, you know, really kind of focused and finally in the right spot to have a shot at it. We had a relay medal in 1994 in speed skating, but no individual medals. Those Olympic Games, my event was actually the second last race of those Olympic Games.
Wow. And
I was the last Australian to compete. So it was a do or die for the Australian team. We had no other medals. So there was a lot of pressure riding on me that day in Nagano. But look, I guess it's kind of cool when you think of all the years of training and you know what it's like. You train a long time. There's a lot of tough days, right? You have a few good days that the media focuses on, but there's a lot of tough days in between where you train and you pick yourself up from disappointment and other things. So when you kind of finally break through to get on that podium at the Olympics, it is amazing. And obviously first female to get a medal, an individual. So and alpine skiing is a pretty tough one to crack for the Southern Hemisphere. So look, obviously it's a moment that will always stay with me.
When you won that Olympic medal, what did you do right after?
It's such a whirlwind though. So alpine skiing, there's no PBs. You don't get to rehearse the course beforehand. So you do one run, it gets reset, and then you do a second run about 3 hours later. About 55 seconds. You're doing about 55 turns, so it's very quick and reactive. And there's you can't make a mistake and pick yourself up and continue, right? You win or lose by 1/100th of a second. And I was in third place after the first run, but I only had a 5/100th of a second lead on the fourth place. And second run, you come down in reverse order. And so as you come through the finish line, you know that you've either held your spot and maintained a medal or lost your spot. So as soon as I crossed that finishing line, the first thing I felt was, it was like, you know, the crowd was going crazy, but it was like a complete silence, like someone turned off the sound until I could turn around, see the scoreboard, see that I had a 1 next to my name. So it meant 2 more girls to come. I had a medal no matter what. And then sort of there's this rush of noise and sensory overload as the crowd goes nuts. And I had my parents, my family, and Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, and then it's a whirlwind between, ceremonies, drug tests and
Yes,
media.
the drug testing.
Lots of things you have to do. But I do remember coming back to my hotel late at night on that night after the race and just having a bit of a moment of pinch myself of going, did that just happen? Because it's pretty cool.
Oh, it's insane. It sounds similar to diving in terms of it goes so fast and you just can't afford to make a mistake because in diving you got like 1.5 seconds, 6 dives, and if you make a mistake on any of them, you're out. And it sounds very similar.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you've got time to think about it, you're too slow.
Yeah, you just got to be
It has to happen automatic. It has to be, you've done enough. You've done your 10,000 hours of training. Your muscle memory and your reaction memory needs to be there to happen instinctively because you don't have time to think about it.
And you're talking about the drug testing. A lot of people don't know that elite athletes get drug tested all the time. Like they show up to my house randomly. I'm sure they do it to you. And you were actually on the USADA board.
I was, and actually went to my 5th Olympics for that. So I was on the Court of Arbitration for Sport internationally, and I went to my 5th Olympics, which was the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018, as an arbitrator for the International Court of Arbitration. And I was actually one of the 3 adjudicators. There was Switzerland, Canada and me for Australia adjudicating on whether Russia would be allowed to compete at those Olympic Games, those athletes. So that was, quite an amazing experience. It was sort of that full circle of Olympic athlete career and then my legal career and then being back there in that capacity was a really interesting perspective of seeing the games. But drug testing. Back in 1992 when I was 17, I had to do gender testing for participating in the Olympic Games, right?
What does gender testing consist of?
Well, at the time you had to do a cheek swab and, they had to confirm that I was female. So, with all the kind of, crazy.
Even back then?
Well, yeah, then it stopped, and obviously now there's more controversy again, which is unfortunate. But back then I actually have a little card from the 1992 Olympic Games that confirms my status.
That's so funny. And what did you end up deciding with the Russians? How did that swing?
With some of them were allowed to compete, but as Olympic athletes of Russia, not Russian athletes, so they didn't have the Russian flag or the Russian anthem. Others were not allowed to compete. And I remember at the time we had this big, burly bobsleigh coach who had been an athlete 7 times at the Olympic Games, and he was now a coach. And we actually did ban him from competing and coaching. There was athletes and coaches, and he was not a happy camper.
Wow.
Just a little intimidating.
But you still had to stick with your guns.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've got to remember in those doping fights is whilst you hear the sort of the pleading case of the person that might be about to miss out on their medal or miss out on the opportunity to compete, there's someone that's missing out on their opportunity if they stay in, right? So we had one athlete who had won a bronze medal at the previous Olympic Games, the Sochi Games, highly controversial for doping, obviously the 4th place missed out on a medal because of that controversy and the doping. So I have actually always been a big stickler for the rules and integrity in sport, as I did in law and obviously now in politics.
Now in politics, all the way across the board. They did the same thing in Tokyo with the Russians. Like they could compete, but under the Olympic flag, and when they won a medal, no Russian music or anything like that.
It's a bit controversial though, because basically it's the athletes that are competing and training outside of Russia and so subject to drug testing as other athletes are internationally around the rest of the world. But if an athlete is only based and training for long periods of time in Russia, then there isn't an accepted or trusted means of drug testing to ensure that they are clean athletes. So that was kind of the distinction, was where they had spent most of their time.
Wow.
But I remember in Pyeongchang watching the ice hockey men's final between, ironically, Canada and the Olympic team from Russia. And, there was a lot of Russian fans in the crowd, and at the end when the Russian athletes won, they ultimately did, they were sort of singing over the top of the Olympic anthem. So it was a very interesting environment to be in.
Fascinating. They're really good at diving as well.
No, there you go.
Now, from courtrooms to Olympic medals to Parliament, how do you deal with pressure?
Well, look, I think everyone has a certain capacity to handle pressure and fight or flight mechanism. I think I'm a bit of a fight when push comes to shove.
I've seen some of your talks in Parliament.
I tend to rise to the challenge. I don't back away too much from a fight. So I guess for me, I'm okay with it. From having started competing at a young age, you get used to the pressure of having to perform in the moment. I'm also comfortable with success or failure. Like, I accept that to win, you have to be prepared to lose.
Yep.
And so being comfortable with losing is part of it. And so as a result, I think I've developed a good kind of resilience to stress and to pressure. And I can cope with it quite well. And, standing up to make a speech in Parliament or to call out, the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition.
Because they heckle each other too when you're talking, like.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of heckling that goes on. There's a lot of, behaviour that I wish could change. I think the Chamber and the Parliament should be a better standard.
I've seen you call that out.
We're trying to, because, school kids come and watch, and I always think if this is what they see from the leaders of political parties in our nation, that's really problematic, because that gives them permission to behave like that as well, and that is not what we want. We want more respectful, more respectful dialogue, and we can disagree, but we can disagree respectfully. I guess I have a high appetite.
High tolerance for the pressure?
I'm a high tolerance. Look, I guess I always, at the end of the day, I guess my advice to people would be, what's the worst that can happen? Be honest with yourself. What's the worst that can happen if you try and do something and you fail? Sure, you might fall on your face, you won't be selected, or you won't succeed or win, but it's not the end of the world. It's not going to break you. It's actually, failure is not the end of the world. It's actually what builds you up to be stronger.
Part of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. You learn more from the races. If I think back to my skiing, I learned more on the days where I had a bad day, because then I could really analyse my race, my event, what I did well, what I didn't do well, what I could improve. And then you start finding every little 1%, and those 1% add up to success at the end of the day. So that's why for me, I'm always fairly willing to give it a go.
Give it a go. I love that, because it's the same way I approach all my diving and everything else. I think about what's the worst that could happen. Like, I'd rather go out there and fail than not go out. And some people get scared of competing. Like, I've seen athletes not go into competitions because they're worried about losing. Yeah. You're like, you got to go out there and be willing to lose to even attempt to win.
Yeah, that fear of failure is a real... it's a real handbrake on people reaching their potential. And it's not to say that everyone manages to do it every time. Like, athletes at the very top level, they will not succeed at every event or
Certainly.
every race.
Yep.
But to find that sweet spot, the zone on some day, it's because you've been prepared to risk it all, not worry about what could happen, and just focus on the moment and letting it happen.
And when it does, it's so special. Now, you beat out Tony Abbott in this seat, and he had a stronghold for 25 years, and he was a former Prime Minister. How did you do that?
Yeah, well, I guess, we talk about intimidation or stepping up to the challenge.
Talk about a challenge.
Look, a lot of people thought, that was a pretty intimidating challenge to take him on. He was a very experienced and very wily politician, right? Fairly adversarial in his style and technique. And so it wasn't a small feat to take him on, and very entrenched in the electorate with a big support base and a lot of money and a lot of support behind him. But look, there's a time for everything, and I think his time had come. The community were really looking for something different, and he had not focused on the community views and values for a long time. I am critical about the major political parties in that they focus on politics for power instead of being really about people and policies, and there's a really big difference. So for me as an independent, I was really happy to step up and give the community an opportunity for a different choice, right? Australia has this fantastic system of compulsory voting and preferential voting, but people can only vote for what's on the ballot paper. And if you don't have a name that reflects your view, or candidate that reflects your views and values on the ballot paper, you can't make a different choice. So for me, it was about giving the Warringah community an opportunity for something else. And they either liked it or they didn't. I was okay with that. But for me, and even as a local mum, I was despairing around some areas of policy, from gender equity and climate and just more integrity and accountability in politics. And I used to rail at the TV and get really upset. And then I thought, well, you can't be a bystander. If you care about the issues, then you got to step up and be part of the process, right? Democracy is not a spectator sport. You've got to get involved. I thought, it was time for Warringah to have a different choice. So it was a big challenge.
Was there a moment where you thought, can I really do this, when the pressure was high and you felt that intense?
Look, I was. I guess I can give you a sporting analogy. When I decided to do it, I was only going to do it if I was going to do it like I would do sport or anything else
100%.
in a very professional way, right?
Yeah.
And if you think back to maybe the old days of Olympism, where it was amateur versus professional, right? Often independent campaigns have been a little bit on the amateur side, where not with big money and not with sort of, professional services and things to help them, and meaning really well, but not with the same resources. I was very determined that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it properly, and I was going to do it in a professional way, with getting the help I needed, making sure I had the resources I needed, and really rolling it out. Because to succeed with a campaign, you're essentially starting a new business, you're launching that business, and you have to win the market within 4 months, and there's no prize for second place, right? So it's you have to do it. So we threw everything at it. Polling came back really supportive straight away, and the community really engaged straight away, which was phenomenal. For me, it was as soon as we announced, the community really consolidated and really just got behind it. It was quite an amazing movement in 2019, and it's continued. Like I have volunteers that have been with me for 6 years that help me 5 days a week here in the office, that help with the community, that are out there for hours and hours.
Well, I see people with the signs.
I know.
I've even seen it on Creatures of Manly, the Instagram account of like nearly 100 people on a corner with the signs.
I know. Well, I think, there's a really strong desire to do politics differently, to be positive. So we have the 4 Ps in our politics and my campaign, which is being polite, positive, prepared and purposeful. And so if your conduct doesn't stick to that, it's not acceptable conduct. So all our volunteers have fun. They really engage with the discussions, the issues, but it's also, they are with like-minded people. So if you're feeling really anxious about climate, for example, and a lot of people, or mental health, from especially, when financial pressures hit, by being with other people that are like-minded, that are focused on being positive, right? How do we call it active hope. How do we, work towards...
Get around good people.
Be around good people, but also instead of letting the problems and your worries eat away at you, do something purposeful about them, right? Be out, have the conversations, try and sway the votes, talk to people. So I think, again, being active in that way is a really, really healthy for the community.
Now, I feel like we've seen a lot of independents come in and more support for independents within Australia generally. Why do you think that is?
I think Australians like competition, right? We're a sport-loving nation.
We do love our sport.
You like plenty
love
of
a good
teams
fight.
plenty of teams on the field. And so a duopoly doesn't really serve our purpose, and yet Australia has developed in that way. And I think the public doesn't like it anymore and is really turning away from it, just as we love having choice when it comes to being a consumer, right? It's a little bit, I think the independents are a bit like the Uber of the transport world, right? We've come in, we haven't emerged, the independents haven't emerged out of nothing. They've emerged because there's a need for it and the communities have asked for it, right? They've mobilised to make it happen. And it's because the major parties, I think, have left people very disillusioned and they're too much involved in politics for power, like it's you or me and just swap it around, but not really tackling a lot of issues and not always listening to community. And then there's always that tension between the donors and the vested interest versus the policy outcomes. And we see that from both sides of politics where there's a real... there's a compromise around what the community expectation is and what then government actually delivers falls a long way short.
Is that because of donors and things like that? Do independents have donors too?
Of course, of everyone. I mean, unfortunately, politics requires a lot of money. But I guess a classic example would be in the last term of Parliament around gambling advertising, right? So very strong desire from
Aren't Australia's the biggest gamblers in the world?
Horrendous. It costs us a fortune. It exacerbates health, mental health, family breakdowns, domestic violence. Like, it is horrendous. Substance abuse, alcohol, lots of really bad impacts. Strong push from all sectors of the community to ban gambling advertising. Not gambling, people can still gamble, but the advertising has become so pernicious and embedded in sport, in everything, and we are hooking young men. Like, I know you've got a lot of young men in your audience. Young men 18 to 25 are the most at risk of becoming hooked on gambling because it's gamified, and they spend, you lose a lot of money. So the Prime Minister was on the ropes. We really had him cornered around needing to act on gambling advertising, and he deflected and did something else because he was getting pressure from vested interests, so gambling and hotel associations.
Because they make a lot of money, the gambling companies.
They do, but the public pays for the consequences. So we either have to make them pay a lot more for the consequences they cause, and at the end of the day, we just can't allow people to get so hooked on it.
Does it cost the government more down the line when you need help systems set
Absolutely.
up to get these people back on track and get people off
It
substance
helps,
abuse?
So it helps because you have a greater, for example, loss of job, increased risk of substance abuse, increased risk of family breakdown, domestic violence, homelessness, like all your metrics of social support that government has to deliver are exacerbated and then are impacted by that high level of dependency. And then you have, unfortunately, the worst outcomes is when it results in suicide. And that has then another impact. So I think Australians gamble something like $27 billion a year that goes offshore, right? This is not to Australian companies paying tax or anything like that. This is offshore. It's huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
that is massive and offshore. Now, all the polls kind of suggest a hung parliament. And from my understanding, would that mean the independents could sway which way the government moves? Does that affect your decision-making? And how do you make that call on who to vote for?
Yeah, look, it'll be really interesting. If you go and look at our constitution, the constitution does not talk about political parties. So I think it's really important to remember political parties are a convention. They're a construction of convenience that's emerged over time where to pool resources, to have increased influence, like-minded MPs formed parties, right? But it's not a must-have for the constitution or how our parliament actually works. But obviously, and the parliament, especially the lower house, it's the House of Representatives. So it's meant to represent the community and Australia. So it actually should be able to change over time, right, to reflect a changing Australian society and our views. So we know vote for the major parties continues to drop, and appetite for alternatives is high, and we're seeing that for the last sort of generation. The vote continues to go that way. So a parliament of a minority government, or I would call it a parliament of balance, is where neither side has at least half of the members of the lower house to be able to form government. So then they have to rely on other members of parliament to give them confidence and supply to be able to assure the Governor-General that they are in a position to form government. So that's the constitutional aspect of it. Beyond confidence and supply, and so that just means money bills, so that a government of the day is able to do a budget and allocate money and spending of public money. Beyond that, each piece of legislation, you can look at that on its merits, and I do that as an independent. I see, is it good law? Has there been good consultation? What's the problem it's trying to fix, or is it trying to wedge somebody? Can I improve it? I really look at it on its merits. I will continue to do that regardless of whether it's a majority or a minority government. So, but the beauty of minority government is if anyone's ever gone into a mediation, that's what it is. Basically, you don't get your way on everything. You're going to have to consult and you're going to have to negotiate, which means we will get better outcomes.
So, and with independents growing and the major parties kind of shrinking, if the independents have the majority of government, if most people in Parliament are independent, who would be the Prime Minister? Well,
you'd elect within the independents would be able to do that. But
so
that's a long way off, right? Because at the moment you still have both major parties have about, it's, like they have obviously currently the Albanese government's got a majority in the House. The coalition, remembering the coalition, gets pitched as one party. Technically, they are two parties, the Liberal Party and the National Party, and they have a coalition agreement between them that they keep secret, I should say. They never reveal what that agreement is, where they share ministries and who's going to get how many members will get a ministerial role and what portfolio will they get? Like, will someone get treasurer, someone will get energy or resources?
Can an independent ever get a ministry?
There's nothing stopping it constitutionally, yeah. I mean, the problem for that would be you're really siding with the side of government informing government. But if you look at European nations, there are a lot of coalition governments. And a coalition government, if I could say a small c coalition government, not what we understand as a coalition government, a small c coalition government, which is a combination of representatives from different political backgrounds forming a government where, there can be sharing or there can just be a working arrangement of how you approach legislation. So that's what I will be interested in looking at. But again, I don't get too hung up on the question because I've been able to have influence in two majority governments. If we get to a minority, I will work with that situation. I feel well equipped to do that. But ultimately, my job as an MP is to get outcomes regardless of what type of government we have.
And when it comes to the biggest impact you've had in your political career so far as an independent, what do you think that would be?
Well, look, I think if you think back to 2019, where climate change is a massive issue and you had both major parties really kind of dancing around the issue. At the time, Labor were committed to reasonably strong targets. The coalition do not have a good track record of commitment on climate change and emissions reduction. And so we really I proposed a Climate Change Act to legislate net zero by 2050 and to lock it into law and really push the Morrison government to commit to net zero by 2050 and then pushed the Albanese government to lock it in and legislate it. So I think that's a really big line in the sand that we achieve because once it's legislated, it's very hard to unwind or to explain why you would now walk away from it. Also, National Anti-Corruption Commission, it's not a perfect model. It needs improving. But the fact that we even have one was very much a result of the push from the crossbench.
Really?
The major parties are in no hurry to close those loopholes unless they are absolutely put under pressure.
Because you've called for more integrity in politics. Do you think it's come a long way? Do you still think it has a long way to go?
Well, I think with the crossbench growing, the pressure on the major party keeps growing. So I'm pushing for truth in political advertising. As a commercial barrister, I was shocked when I came into politics to find out that we don't have laws that prevent lies in political advertising.
So you can just say what you want?
Pretty much. As long as you don't mislead a voter on how to vote, as in how to fill out the ballot paper.
Oh, really? So you can say what you want if you don't tell them the wrong way to...
Yeah, you can't mislead them on how to vote, but you can say pretty much everything else that you want. And it's such a contrast to consumer law. So in consumer law, we don't want people to get scammed. So if you're going to buy a service or a product, any advertising about it has to be correct, right? It has to be complete. It can't have misleading or deceptive information.
And that protects all of us.
And that protects our money. We're protected from being scammed, but we have nothing that protects voters from being scammed, from political lies. And ironically, all voters, whether they're conservative or left or right, wherever they are, all support truth in political advertising. And I've proposed 2 pieces of legislation. I've now proposed a voluntary ethical political advertising code to really raise the issue. But the two main groups blocking it are the 2 major parties because they want to keep the right to lie to you, which is crazy.
So you can say anything you want.
Pretty much.
On a political ad.
Yeah. I mean, we've always got defamation law that might kick in, but it's very weak when it comes to public interest and politics. They can pretty much say whatever they want. Which the beauty about this day.
Can they lie about numbers? Like if I see a political ad and it's got something random like unemployment's down 20%, could that just be a lie?
Absolutely. Or you lie. I mean, what they tend to do is lie about their opponent, right? So they'll make up what they think the opponent's. Yeah, the big thing in Australian politics is fear and smear, right? So always try and scare the voter about what, vote for me because I'm the least worst option compared to them, right? There's a lot of negative advertising, fear stuff. And so smearing the other side with allegations of what their position really is or what it isn't and what the risks are, and they're going to wreck the joint. And, it's always about that. It's never positive. It's never what's my vision for Australia and what vote for me because, I will deliver this or I will be a champion for this.
I think it's more of like, I'm just not that guy. I know.
There's a lot of that. And Australians hate it. Like all my research shows voters are so switched off. That's why trust in politics is so low. I mean, lawyers and politicians are just the absolute bottom of the pile when it comes to trust.
You would have had a tough run being through both.
I know. I can sympathise.
You've come out the other end though.
Yeah. Well, but look, I don't blame voters because again, there is so much gaslighting that comes from the political class to voters, and there are, we've got real challenges and opportunities that we need to tackle. And then the political class is so busy about themselves and gaslighting that you don't actually get real commitment. So I think that comes back to your question. That's why people are turning to alternatives. They want something different.
I didn't know that you could just kind of say
just lie.
whatever you want. I did hear you can't be sued for defamation for anything you say in Parliament though. I heard that's protected.
Yeah. Well, so the chamber is protected so that it's so that there is free speech and there is that opportunity to have a robust debate without being, worried about being caught for defamation. That's okay, but I don't think that should be a ticket to misbehave. Like you shouldn't be able to just behave appallingly and outside of, and make things up. I mean, if you're shown to have lied in Parliament, you can be asked to correct the record, right? I don't think that's always quite strong enough. But yeah, no defamation from what you say in Parliament.
Interesting, because I've seen them ask you to withdraw something before. And then if you withdraw something, does it actually come off the record or does it stay on the record but they just make a note that you've withdrawn it? Like, what does that mean to withdraw something?
I haven't even gone back to look at the Osley transcript.
That's probably a random thing to know.
We have got standing orders, and the standing orders require that you can't make, you can't do innuendo, you can't do an inference or defamatory stuff like that. So there is an intent for dialogue and debate to be respectful. It clearly often isn't, and so the speaker who rules over, chairs over the Parliament and the chamber, will often say, to assist the chair, could you withdraw? So to assist the chair, if it's an unparliamentary term or unparliamentary language has been used, could you please withdraw? And what often happens is between government and opposition, they'll be trading barbs and insults to each other, and at some point someone will ask for it to be withdrawn, and the chair will ask for it to be withdrawn. But to me, that it's not very effective because people still feel free to do the insult in the first place.
It just can be taken away after.
Yeah.
And with energy in Australia being in a tricky position, what are your thoughts on nuclear power?
Yeah, look, it's really, I'm quite agnostic when it comes to the technology. And I sat on the Climate Change, Environment and Energy Committee that looked at should we lift the moratorium in Australia. And that was actually chaired by Ted O'Brien, now the shadow energy spokesman for the coalition. And when we looked at that inquiry, we went all around Australia, looked at all the history of nuclear around the world, where the technology was at, what its challenges are when it comes to time, development, costs, getting social licence of where you put it and then the waste. The report ultimately found, Ted wrote the report, said not without your consent. So basically that for nuclear to really have an opportunity, it really has to be embraced or endorsed by the community, which is a tough thing to do. The biggest problem I think we have for nuclear is we have a really tight timeline of transition at the moment. So most of our energy power from coal-fired power stations has to retire by 2035. The best analogy I can give people is it's like you're driving your really old Holden, the 40-year-old Holden, and it's breaking down every week and it's costing a lot of money to keep it on the road, and it really has to go, right? It just is not economic to keep it going. So because so much of our energy generation is due to retire by 2035, we need to roll out quickly more energy to replace that. The cheapest form of energy in Australia is renewables, solar and wind and batteries, and the costs of that continually come down. So the biggest problem for nuclear is the time it takes to do it.
Too long?
Yeah, it's
So you're saying
huge.
that we need more power and we can't need it now, and nuclear is going to take us way too long? Or no?
Because we don't have nuclear. So nuclear, you would need a process of lifting and changing the laws, right? Federal and each state laws. Then you have to put in place all the safety laws and regulations.
And you'd
around
need
it.
that to be done right.
And that's not going to be quick, right? Then you
Yeah.
need to work out where you're going to put it, who's going to pay for it, what technology you're going to use. At the most conservative estimate, and where it's happening all around the world, is nuclear takes a minimum of 15 to 20 years on a good case, right, on a good scenario. And when we did that, the inquiry into nuclear, we looked at should it be small modular reactors or large-scale nuclear plants. At the time, the view was large-scale is way too expensive, couldn't possibly look at that, maybe small modular reactors. Problem with small modular reactors is everyone's been talking about them for about 30 years and they still haven't come online and they're not cost effective yet. So they may come online in the future. I don't have a crystal ball. And if in 15, 20 years' time they are commercially competitive, then that might be Australia might be able to consider it for the last 5 to 10% of our energy generation. But we can cover our energy needs through renewable up to 85 to 90% of our energy needs. And then it's that last 10% that the question is it gas? Is it potentially nuclear or something like that? But we're not there yet. And the problem is we really need to focus on the next 10 years transition and what we can roll out at scale economically. Is we as a continent we have abundant solar and wind capacity.
Because I was talking to Chris Bowen and he was saying that 50% of our energy last quarter or so was renewable power, which is great.
Yeah.
But energy prices are also really high. And he was saying it's because we don't have enough renewables yet. Is that why energy prices are so high?
Yep. Oh, it's a mix. It's a lack of investment over the last 10 to 15 years in the transmission lines and updating our infrastructure. So again, if you think of the analogy, you're running your old Holden, which was what we're doing when we're relying on coal-fired power stations, and they break down frequently, it's expensive to keep them running. So those costs are adding to the mix. And then you've got, for example, the fuel and maybe the roads or the servicing they need, they're all adding to that. So as we transition to new technology, you've still got some investment that's needed with, transmission lines, with upgrading around homes, around networks, and that's money that we're going to have to invest no matter which, whatever the source of energy is, we're still going to have to do that. Because also we're a growing population and those needs keep expanding. So that investment is there no matter what. The cost is difficult, right? Because we are still too dependent on old energy and gas is the most expensive form of energy. I mean, after nuclear, gas is your most expensive one.
I heard the only good thing about gas, though, is that we can turn it on and off. Like it's the only form of energy we can regulate the power grid quite easily.
And that's why that question of that last 5 to 10% of our grid, if it comes down to being between nuclear and gas, it will probably be gas.
It's amazing.
Gas can turn on and off as needed, whereas nuclear is a much more kind of, constant 24/7 kind of needing to be done and is expensive because of waste questions and all the safety protocols around it.
We want done right.
None of this is simple, but when I talk to people from around the world and experts in this space, they are always a little bit astounded to hear how much Australia still grapples with this question, because they look at Australia as a continent and they think you're an island continent, you have vast areas of coastline, you have huge expanses of space to do large-scale solar and wind. Your population is very much concentrated around East Coast and, coastal. I think it's like 87% of the Australian population lives within 50 kilometres of the coast, right? So it's very concentrated. So they look at the Australian continent and they go, but you have so much capacity and we have a lot of sunshine, right? A lot of sun. And then areas with a lot of wind that can complement that. So other nations do look at us a little bit in bewilderment of why we have such a issue with becoming leaders in clean energy.
Because I have an EV and I absolutely love it. It's an X-Pang. And knowing that 50% of the energy in the last quarter was produced with renewables makes me feel even better about driving it. And seeing like the Snowy Hydro 2.0, kind of a battery that you pump water up and pump it back down. That's insane. I reckon that's like a really good thing.
Yeah, and look, the thing that probably doesn't get talked about much also is if we electrify transport, it's safe. Like it gives us actually domestic security from a national security point of view because we import our oil, right? So we are dependent on trading routes and bringing it in from other nations for our transport. So the more we electrify our transport and our fuel is from our rooftop, the safer it is in terms of Australia's national security against, price shocks and what can happen around the world. So it's really in our best interest to electrify and rely upon the resource we have in such abundance, which is wind and sunshine.
From a curiosity perspective, would it be a security risk to have everything electric if we got hacked or if our power grid went down? Like, do we still need some like gas cars or
But we have that anyway. Even if you have gas generation, we still have a very AI and automated kind of grid, right? We are very connected. We are that question of hacking and the role AI plays in our systems and safety is very real. We've seen that, but that doesn't change your, the sort of where the generation comes from. And look, we see when natural disasters strike, communities get isolated. So them having sort of like a microgrid, an independent capacity to continue to operate, to continue to be powered. So again, rooftop solar, batteries, they all create great opportunity, especially Australia being such a large continent. More localised microgrids actually really makes sense rather than spending huge amounts on transmission lines that go all the way around the country.
Because I heard we have one that goes from like Queensland nearly all the way down to Tasmania.
I know. You think about that's the whole the whole continent of coastline.
It's insane. And if you could change one piece of policy today to better the environment, to better sustainability, what would that be?
Geez, that's just tough. If I could have
a
magic wand, there's so many I would change.
What would you do?
Look, I do think we need to phase out subsidies to fossil fuels. Like, I'll just be blunt. We still spend billions of public money supporting fossil fuel companies who are making billions of dollars of profit, paying very little tax for the Australian, for the Australian public.
How does that happen? Punters politics do a really good job.
Vested interest, right? They are, the Minerals Council is one of the biggest donors to the major parties, both Coalition and Labor. So they have a lot of influence. I look at this term of government, the petroleum resource rent tax was set at a really low level. It doesn't recoup anywhere near the revenue for the Australian people that we should be getting for the gas. It's Australian gas at the end of the day. There's just an unwillingness to properly tax that sector compared to other nations. I mean, the data's mind-boggling. So large gas companies pay less tax than what we recoup from beer excise, right? So Australians having a beer, there's a level of tax on the beer that when you drink it.
Australians do like a beer.
I know they do, but we are paying more tax that way than massive multinational gas companies are paying through making billions of dollars of profit.
It's frustrating, isn't it? Punters politics pointed this out on his social stuff, and I didn't even know until he made videos about it, and I found it fascinating. Have you seen some of his content?
I've had a chat with him. He's great. He's actually given me a mug. I've got a mug and a couple of things from him. He's great. It's really good, and it's a real conversation about these facts. And I think traditional politics loves the idea of pull the curtain back and not let people sort of think about it too much.
Yeah.
And it's really important to pull back the curtain and start talking about these things because we're all paying for it, right? Unfortunately,
so we're paying for them to take our stuff.
Well, we're paying for them through the consequences, right? Okay. So with continuing to burn fossil fuels, temperatures are going up, which means events are exacerbated and accelerated. So we've got more humidity in the atmosphere, which means when you have a storm, it is a bigger storm. It has more impact. We're paying for it through our insurance premiums, right? Insurance has gone up by 32% in a couple of years. So huge. And I think it's about 1 in 5 in Australia are uninsured or underinsured. So you risk losing everything you've worked for your whole life in this one event, and then you probably can't afford insurance, so you will have nowhere to recover your position. And I don't think that's acceptable that we are all as citizens left holding the bag, right? We are having to bear the consequences of all of this. That equation has to be fixed. So that's why, I'm proposing a climate resilience plan where we redirect $10 billion that go to mining companies in fossil fuel credits or tax credits back to a resilience fund to help local government and households build resilience and lower their insurance premiums. So I think when we look at our spending as a nation, whoever's in government has choices, right? They have priorities. And we need to start putting people at the front of the priority list, less than sort of big business and fossil fuel interests.
Here in your area, what's one of the biggest changes you've made for sustainability?
I think one of the biggest things is we've got a really high uptake in electric vehicles, so about 173% in the last couple of years.
They're really fun
great.
to drive. Have you got one?
I have an electric vehicle.
Okay.
I do. I love it. I drive it to Canberra, and we do now have fast chargers in Parliament House. So that's we're
I might have to plug mine in there.
Pushing change.
Yeah.
Locally, I think it's that engagement with politics. The idea that politics is not something you talk about or engage in. That's changing. People, the three ways you can impact your emissions the most is through obviously your energy provider, turning to renewable energy or putting solar panels and batteries on in your house, where you invest your money and what banks. So banks and superannuation, especially your super. Super is a massive investment tool. And so being in a super that doesn't invest in fossil fuels is really important. And then you vote, right? Our lives are, ruled by the laws of our country, and the laws will limit your hopes, will determine how much tax you pay and everything else. So who you put in charge of creating those laws really matters, right? So I always say, especially to young women, but all our young students and men around, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, because if you are not at the table making decisions, you're going to suffer the consequences of whoever is making the decisions.
So you reckon the biggest impact everyone could make for sustainability is look where they're investing their super, solar panels and batteries.
Your energy,
and
your
voting.
Transport and your voting.
Wow. And then day-to-day things like trying to reduce plastics.
Sure, but we, Australians are really high consumers of plastics, and we have a high waste impact. Much worse than what people realise. So
really?
Yeah, we're a high consumer.
Why is that?
Well, we're a high consumer society as a developed nation. We are consumers, and so there's a lot of plastics, and we have a high footprint. But at the end of the day, you have to start turning that around because there's a consequence to it, and we, it's not a. I don't know. I just don't think the planet's going to cope indefinitely with us all abusing it.
Yeah, so and it's sad to go to the ocean and see plastics everywhere, like when you're snorkeling or I love going scuba diving, and it makes you sad.
Well, and we love it. Like locally, we've got Cabbage Tree Bay, which is just a beautiful aquatic reserve. We swim from Manly to Shelley Beach, and you Basil the turtle, and you've got wobbegong sharks, and schools of fish. It's amazing. But, everyone is very aware that this is precious and valuable, and we have to protect it. So there's a really strong push from the community about making sure we value that and we protect it.
And being a lawyer, you would have seen people in the most vulnerable positions as a barrister. Did that change the way you looked at politics, or has that influenced your empathy for people through politics?
Yeah, as a barrister, you're helping one client at a time, right? You're doing the best you can for their case. You've got a certain amount of evidence available to you, and you try and get the best outcome possible within the law. I guess moving into politics for me, it was about thinking, well, instead of helping one client at a time, let's try and change the law so that the law works for more people and protects more people. And then I also know that well-drafted law matters. So that if the law is well-drafted, it will be easy to apply, and you won't spend huge amounts of money with lawyers in court trying to argue about what was intended by the legislation and how it should apply. So, doing things properly at the beginning makes a big difference to the cost of implementing it. So I think that's where my experience as a barrister really comes into play, is really thinking strategically about how, what does good law look like, taking on board feedback, looking at stakeholder groups, having inquiries, submissions, really doing things cutting corners is never good, right? So maybe it's the athlete.
It never works. It never works.
So
it's tough and it's
doing
hard.
things well, properly, the first time is so much better than having to fix it after the fact.
Now, in your area in Manly, you have the Manly Rock Jump.
Yeah.
Now, I may have been there once or twice, and then they put a fence up, which, for some people it may have made the rock jump a bit higher. And then they put some barbs up so you couldn't jump off the fence. Were you part of the construction of that fence or getting that through?
No, look, I wasn't.
Okay.
I am aware of jump rock or rock jump rock. I am a mother of young adults, and I may or may not be aware that they probably have been there as well. Look, you've got to be remembering it can be dangerous, and so people have to be very careful about those kind of things, because the consequences of a moment of fun can be a lifetime of consequence. So
You've got to be careful. I always tell people too, never dive head first. Obviously, jumping isn't very safe either. I'm a professional.
You are a professional, but others are not.
Tide makes a massive difference as well. You've got to make sure you're safe.
Tide, and look, unfortunately, the majority of people that drown in Australia are young men. And men where alcohol is involved, or, conditions beyond people's capabilities. So, again, I think it's reminding everybody that a moment of fun is not worth a lifetime of consequence. So, maybe that's the mum in me just asking people to be careful. But look, as a skier and with my career, I had very little injuries in my entire, I did 26 winters in a row, 13 years of international competing. I had no breaks, no knee surgeries, no nothing.
How?
Because I managed risk, I was always very, I didn't take unnecessary risk, and I didn't do silly things.
I've been very injured many times doing silly things, so there's got to be method in your madness there.
Yes, and preparation, fitness training and stretching and all that stuff plays into it, but also respecting your situation. I respect risk. Right?
Yep.
I think I don't, you have to be respectful of a situation.
Certainly. Now, if you don't mind, I've got a few videos of the rock jump from the Creatures of Manly Instagram account. I was going to get your thoughts on them. Have you personally jumped before?
No, I haven't.
No, okay. Have you jumped at any other rock jumps?
I may have done other rock jumps when I was in other locations travelling.
Oh, I will. Yeah, good point.
And then I know Creatures of Manly have some very funny situations with people doing very silly things at times.
What do you think of the Creatures of Manly Instagram account? I've even seen a video of everyone holding your posters as well, which looks good. You got nearly 100 supporters.
Yeah. Look, it's a lot of fun. I always worry that there's sometimes maybe alcohol consumption might be involved in some of their filming. So I'm always mindful of if people are really hurting themselves.
No, good. What do you think of the riding the bike off the Manly Rock Jump?
Goodness. Oh dear.
What are your
thoughts? That does not look like a young person either. That is a person of a certain maturity to it doing that. So
maybe the young people are more responsible.
I think clearly, let me tell you, that could have gone wrong in so many ways.
Yeah, you got to stay safe out there. And I always say never, ever dive at a rock jump. It's not safe and you're right. It's not worth a life of
people
dangerous.
have become paraplegics by diving in the surf and hitting a sandbank, right? So, again, there's, it pays to be safe.
It certainly does. And finally, what is your vision for Australia?
Oh, look, I think Australia is an incredible nation. We are the most multicultural nation in the world. We have so much colour, vibrance, diversity. We have so much potential. We hit above our weight in so many areas. I'm excited about Australia because I think Australia is just a phenomenal nation. And I've travelled the world a lot, for sport. I've seen a lot of other nations and I'm incredibly proud of Australia. But my vision is that we respect our diversity, that we support everybody to be safe, at home, at work, online, that we have an environment where people can have their best lives, thrive, be supported to do well, and not hit down on people. I hate that small-minded idea that you have to, control and I think that's a strong Australia. So that's where I probably disagree with, the Leader of the Opposition in particular, that for me, strength does not come from hitting down or controlling or restricting other people. Strength actually comes from understanding, from independence, right, and really standing up and having integrity and accountability. So to me, that's the Australia I want, is an Australia that really stands up in the world, that's independent, that doesn't have to, be at the beck and call of our major trading partners or our major defence partners. I want Australia to stand up for itself.
Strong and independent but free.
There you go, strong and independent. That's on the T-shirt that I have.
Well, Zali Steggall, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Sam.